potential friends and adventurers. Welcome to the first ever episode of DM Table. Today we are going to talk about how to get into tabletop role-playing, but in 5 separate levels of simplicity. Now, before any of these methods, you would need to find yourself some players or a DM if you're a player and not a DM. But finding a DM can be actually harder than becoming a DM, so if you're quite resolved to get into role-playing, which is very wonderful I assure you, and you may as well be quite resolved, I recommend becoming a DM and getting players of your own. Now, to get the players, well, you don't need as big of a party as some would think. It's simply a misconception. People used to do this in big groups, but, well, schedules are always a problem, and we want great adventures, great stories, so to get easier synchronization between your schedules, just have a small group. That's much simpler. Even one person that's DMing and one person that's a player is quite sufficient if you're not overly too shy to do that sort of thing, because I hear some people say that that's sort of more intimate and therefore shyness-inducing, I guess, but I've been doing it all the time and I see no difference. Well, at least not any negative difference. I see many positive things about it. You need only schedule for yourself and your friend, and there you go. But if you want to just get 2 friends, so that's 3 people, 2 players and a DM, and there you go. Excellent party. Also, as a beginner, I heard many beginners fall into this, you should probably avoid large parties. If you have lots of friends and all of you want to play and all of you have time, even better for scheduling is to have 2 groups with 2 different potentially DMs, maybe. That would be wonderful because then you get to play and you get to DM. Best of both worlds. So, if you have 6 people, make 2 groups of 3. If you have 4 people, well, you can make some sort of 2 groups of 2 or just 2 rotational groups of 3 players and a DM, and so on and so forth. It's sort of almost, I feel, like an understated tip, but this is one of the best ones. I really recommend all this. Now, I'll make an episode about how to find your players or how to find yourself a DM, but for now, let's concentrate on, once you've decided to be a DM, how to get into the role-playing, even if you haven't ever done it before. Now, first method is the simplest one, and that's either having a very simple system or a diceless system, otherwise known as freeform. But whilst it has a bad sort of reputation because of having people do whatever they want in a role-playing game and, seem unrestricted in their randomness, playing live will allow you to have potentially nice people that you invited to play with, and therefore a freeform should be good if you have a somewhat competent DM. Now, I've been a DM on and off for almost 20 years now, and I have some experience, and my players have told me thus far that they most prefer my diceless leading, incredibly enough. And whilst I almost tend to rely a bit on systems otherwise, apparently diceless is great if you have a reasonably good DM, so I hear. And to simply become a DM, you would want to assess what kind of story are you able to tell. Now, this might be, if you're a first-time viewer of such things, abstract to you, so let me get to the point. To do a simple role-playing story, you would need to sort of think up ahead of time a location, a scenario, and so on, but don't set the scenario hard in stone. You basically may know that there is a cabin in the woods that perhaps will have something later lurking about, stalking the players, and that the players will be such and such, so and so, maybe a group of children on a vacation together in a mountain cabin, having fun. And mind you, Whilst this seems like a cliche setup for a horror movie, as a role player you have freedom. You have freedom to make this wonderful journey of friends together that will have wonders and playfulness and fun and romance and exploration and all kinds of fun stuff. You just need to be cautious of, well, you need to set some ground rules, like only things that would be allowed on children's television are allowed, is one simple rule for a beginner that's leading freeform diceless system. You basically are a referee of, well, logic, physics, and even potentially spirituality within the world that you're describing. You describe, for example, a scene, then the player describes what they do, then you assess how they're succeeding to do it, whether they're succeeding to do it, how well is their action applicable in the current situation. Now, this is too large a subject to explain just right up immediately, so you can look up how to roleplay, basically, if you never did so, but I know that many would think that I'm crazy for recommending freeform for a beginner, but that's actually potentially one of the best ways. I kind of almost started with that myself, even though I have gotten to read quite a thick system at the time. And it's quite liberating because it flows fast and, well, if you have people you trust, it's quite fair and balanced and everything works as you would expect it. There's no real finickiness to it. Later, when you really do get into role-playing, you'll see how much finickiness there can be in learning an official system that's not necessarily that adjusted to storytelling as much as it is to its own purposes, really. And yes, commercial systems tend to do that. They tend to have their own legacy that they uphold as brand recognition, and that's all fine and well, but it can bog things down, and new things are hard to develop in an already environment populated by rules that already exist and are hard to write. So therefore, perhaps freeform is the easiest way to learn roleplaying. You just decide to run freeform and then look up how to roleplay, concentrating on system agnostic methods, really, that you can pick up from other people's or my later videos, and there you go. That is downright the simplest method that you can use to get into role-playing seriously. Maybe perhaps just as simple, and I certainly listed as part of this, is to get a system that's as simple as having just a single resolution method. A resolution method is something that you do when you want to decide impartially something that may have many complex details go into it and perhaps some luck. So, say that one of your players encounters a bear and they decide to shout at the bear to make it run away. Now, as a DM, you probably expected there to be bears in the area that you're leading the players to, so you researched ahead of time about bears and their habits, and so now you have some glimpse of how well this will work. So you can assess about how much challenge this will be. For example, if you had a scale of, say it's a scale of 1 to 10, and you give a player a simple single die, and they roll it, and you adjust the difficulty dependent on the quality of their action versus the, well, opposing action, and then, well, you see who comes out on top. You have the player roll, you potentially have the opponent roll or not, and you see which score is greater. Now, by score I mean you could assign skills to your players. Skills that you don't need to invent, just let the players tell you what skills they want to have, and tell them they get a single skill point at a level up, for example, and now at first level your players have a single skill with a single point. And now, each time they level up, they can ask you whether they can have another skill that they can put a point into, and If you are agreeing with the source of the skill, for example driving for somebody who lives in a city, then they can put the point in the skill, and then when the skill comes up as useful later on, they already have +1 on that roll. They are likelier to come out on top, and you can now adjust how many points they get per level. For example, maybe they get 3 points per level. So now they are either very good at one skill, or good at 3 different skills, or pretty good at one skill and somewhat good at another skill. And if a player requests a nebulous skill that doesn't fit, you can simply tell them that it's not available, but be lenient as long as it's not something too ridiculous. Really, because as long as everybody is agreeing about the tone of the campaign, it should be fine. Each time party does something nice and wonderful, or progresses the story, or you think it's cool or it's climactic, give them a level. And each time they do that, give them a level. And there, I invented a system for you. You can now use it and get simply into role-playing. Yeah, I think it should be good. Check it out and tell me in the comments how it worked out. I'll also test it with my players later. Now, for the second method of getting into role-playing very easily, it's finding a lightweight system. And for people who prefer to learn, this might be actually the easiest method. You just find some sort of extremely lightweight system and you use it. Maybe even cut it down a little bit, though that's kind of for advanced use, as it were, but not too much. I mean, when I say cut it down, I mean, for example, if you take a system like Ryutan, I think that some rules there are just there for fun of people who like rules. They are completely able to be taken out of the game, and the classes listed there would still work. And you would have even a lighter system than the light system already was in the first place. You wouldn't need all the mystification that they put in there about the storyteller having the power of a dragon and so on and so forth. You don't need necessarily as much rules to just do what I previously said. Roll occasionally, have fun otherwise. Rolling is only there to arbitrate between players and enemies and circumstances and so on, so that you don't have all the weight of bearing judgment down on them and them looking up towards you with either angry or puppy eyes. And well, there's also that thing whether you can even have the nerve, the willingness to get somebody killed who didn't deserve it but fell into a hole or something suddenly, and there's that. So that's why people use dice to do the dirty work for them. Now, I was able to lead diceless because I said to my players that I'll be fair and guiding, but completely impartial, and that I'll help them in any way I can outside of the game, but that I'll never do anything that even resembles fudging inside of the game. Now, if you don't know what it is, you can look up what is fudging in role-playing, but it's basically setting the difficulty in favor of players that are looking to be failing or such. Though there's opposite fudging as well, where meaner or dramaticer DMs decide to fudge against the players that are succeeding, but I like my system and my leading to be balanced, so that I feel when I'm a player that my efforts are rewarded, that I understand the physics and the spirituality of the plane in which I'm in, that I can rely on my actions to provide results. I don't want to play with a fudger that thinks that they know best and they'll produce all the drama and you're a set piece. You should be there, live your life, swing your sword, move through the dungeon, and then your fudger will make the drama. You just sit tight. Your plans, they'll be as good as they are, except they'll always work just barely. Or, something similar to that. I don't like dramatic fudging. I like story to grow naturally, and I recommend this because, well, I can understand. I mean, there are lots of disbalanced systems and people fudge because they don't like what the system provides for them. they feel that the balance is off, but you should probably firstly try to get everything in order with your playing and running the game before you set up to fudge, because fudging is like house ruling, except you're not thinking. You're just house ruling on the fly without thinking. So, do you know how hard it is to house rule properly? Now think about how hard it is to house rule properly whilst you're not thinking about the rules at all. Think about that. Anyways, a lightweight system can be learned overnight. In fact, you can just read the book, which is very thin, and you can learn it within an hour or two. And sure, maybe you won't memorize everything, but you can look it up. I mean, the book is there, and it will support you when you need it in your time of need. And well, that's one of the quickest ways to prepare for running tomorrow if you need to learn it today. I mean, I've heard of that situation. So look up lightweight systems. They are popular these days, well enough that you'll probably find reviews, find material on how to do them. You can use mine system above that I recommended. It's a bit simple and on the spot, but maybe it will be a new good thing, who knows. And try it out. Perhaps run what is called a one-shot and then expand it or such. Also ask your players what do they want to play, many people don't. Combine their favorite interests, do all that sort of thing. But for now, that's what I want to recommend about lightweight systems. Now, for the third method, it's finding a very accessible system. Accessible system would be a system that people have incredible amount of experience with, even if it's not the lightest one around. Famous systems like D&D. I'm not sponsored by anybody, I have 0 subscribers as of this point. Like D&D, but those can be very complex. So basically, the third method is finding a friend or lots of resources on your system before you buy it. You do not buy something before you learn lots about it as much as possible. Maybe you should even learn the system before you buy it. It's just then that you can decide on the system. And don't try to over-decide on the system before you decide on the adventure. You should pick the system according to what it's able to produce. You need to know what you want your players to be able to accomplish, what kind of superpowers or no superpowers they should or shouldn't have before you pick a system. And then you should seek a system about it. Well, you want to run or lead, as I say, towards their interests. So getting to sit down with the player and talk to each other about what you both love to spend your time on would be one of the best ways to get to spend that time on those things, really. So back to the accessible systems. If you have a friend that knows D&D, obviously if the friend has time, they could teach you all. They could potentially run the thing. That's what accessible means. It means that the vast majority has access to it, even if they didn't do it before. It's lookable up, it's learnable about, it has a great number of forums, it has lots of support, it has years of research. And yet it still has its flaws and so on, so you will probably need to put in lots of learning, weeks of preparation, back-breaking work, sweat, tears, studying, yeah, kind of almost like school, even though it's supposed to be fun. But it can actually be quite fun and uplifting whilst you do it, and then you don't get the tears and the stuff until later you find out that nothing was balanced, and then come the tears. But you'll have potentially fun in your first one-shot. You can look up what one-shot is, by the way. Therefore, accessible systems are not necessarily the easiest ones to learn, but they are accessible to learn and not with extreme effort either. And you can somewhat slightly house rule them, but for that you need experience. Therefore, this is the third in the row of complexity that we are listing of methods. Now, for the fourth method, yes, we have come upon the house ruling system. Now, this isn't exactly like the third point at all, because house ruling is a difficult responsibility. But it's doable, but Why would I suggest this to a beginner? Some people are already tearing out hair thinking I'm crazy, but I suggest potentially house ruling a very simple system. Now that's what I mean by fourth method. Either make your own or house rule a very simple system. I mentioned it before, but you can remove some rules, add some rules. For example, when I began, and this is how I began when I was a beginner, I house ruled D&D 2.0 into having multi-classing resembling D&D 3.0. Because 3.5 was not available at the time anyways, yes, it wasn't as complicated as 3.5. In 2.0 you had kind of some straightforwardness and some depth. I mean, read spells from that time, they are much more raw, powerful, real. Just check them out, just read spells from then and compare them to spells from 3.5 in comparison. And you can compare them to spells from now, from the 5th edition, and see what I mean. There are differences. Now, spells aside, I took and made it so that you could be with any race, achieving any sort of level combination. Now, if you're a beginner, you don't know what I'm talking about, but it's sort of like free multi-classing for everybody. And I rebalanced a bit humans and called it a day mostly, and that's how I ran. But it's a great responsibility to house rule, and you have to be willing to listen to feedback, even negative feedback from your players, because they might tell you that, hey, they're suffering here from what you just did. They might not be having fun. You might like your system because you made your favorite sort of whirly-twirly wheel of playing with the wheel at the table, and nobody else is having fun because you're just whirling your wheel and they're sitting there not having what to do because you made over complex bunch of nonsense. It can happen, but I hope it won't happen to you. Now we're getting to the point 5. What you want to do with the system, but what I don't recommend for beginners, and yet this is how most beginners begin, is to test multiple varying systems to see how they fare at your table. Of course, unfortunately, many people do this by raw back-breaking labor, by testing them manually and then finding out their flaws over the years, sometimes decades, frequently decades, and well, you know how rewarding it is when you find out that something you were doing for years ends up being insufficient or somehow lacking. It hurts you. Even if your players had fun, it hurts you as a DM, and you wasted time. So what I recommend is how to actually pick a system where you're an advanced user that can pick between multiple complex systems. This is to take your setting ahead of time, and I recommend this for all points actually. Take setting ahead of time into consideration, take your players into consideration, take what you want your characters to be able to achieve. What powers should they be able to have, what things should they be able to do, and how should they be able to do it. This is somewhat easier to do with settings from official products that are not tabletop, interestingly enough, because they rely more on storytelling, and whilst they are also not perfect, you'll have a better time of deciding what you want to do. And then once you know what your characters are supposed to achieve, then you can seek a system in which they can clearly achieve it in multiple good ways, and discuss with your players which system fits this role, because otherwise people may play and it may happen to be just great, but it may happen that nobody will get to do what they set out to do, and therefore little whom will have fun. So in order to have the best experience, start from the experience and then seek the system that will facilitate it if you're picking between systems to learn at length. And mind you, it's not enough to watch experienced people on, say, YouTube run a system to know whether it'll work for your purposes, because they did potentially this. They know what they need to do to make it a success. That's why they're recording it. You, for example, would need to first find out what it is that you need to achieve, then find out how to achieve it within the rules before it can develop into a story that you can display so to others. But once you do, it'll be very worthwhile, and you'll have years and years of fun. I'll talk more about that at length later, but for now, adventurer, if you thought this was unique, spare a like or a click. See you next week. Bye.